Congratulations on the promotion. I hope it was worth it. Absolutely.
She celebrated firing a single dad, popping a bottle of champagne in the break room before his desk was even cleared out. She did not know that in exactly 41 minutes, the owner of the company would walk through that same door, scan the room, and ask a question that would end her career before lunch. Denise Whitfield had wanted the regional director title for 3 years. She had watched 2 men get promoted past her, had smiled through both announcements, had clapped until her palms stung, and had told herself that her turn was coming. When the district finally opened up a permanent director position at the Meridian Logistics Warehouse outside Columbus, Ohio, she decided she was not going to wait for it. She was going to earn it, and in her mind, earning it meant proving she could run a tight operation, cut what needed cutting, and deliver numbers nobody could argue with. Daniel Reyes had worked in that warehouse for 6 years. He ran the overnight inventory crew, the kind of job most people walked past without a second glance, stacking pallets, checking manifests, making sure trucks left on time so stores 3 states away had shelves that weren't empty in the morning. He was quiet. He kept to himself. He ate lunch alone at a folding table by the loading dock, usually with his phone propped against a water bottle, watching something on mute so he wouldn't disturb anyone. What nobody in that building knew, except maybe the 2 co-workers who covered for him more times than they'd admit, was that Daniel's 7-year-old daughter, Lily, had a heart condition that required regular monitoring at Nationwide Children's Hospital. Some mornings the monitors caught something, and some mornings they didn't, and either way, Daniel could not always predict when a doctor would tell him to bring her back in 3 hours instead of 3 months. He had been late 4 times in 90 days. Each time, he clocked in as soon as he physically could. Each time, he made up the hours without being asked. Denise did not know any of that, or maybe she did, and simply decided it didn't matter, because the numbers on her attendance report didn't leave room for a footnote about a sick little girl. She had been handed the file 2 weeks earlier by the outgoing shift supervisor, a stack of names flagged for performance inconsistency. And Daniel's name sat right at the top. She called him into the small glass-walled office off the warehouse floor on a Tuesday morning. He came in still wearing his safety vest, his eyes tired in the particular way that only parents of sick children understand. And he sat down across from her without saying much of anything, because 6 years of experience had taught him that nothing he said in that chair ever seemed to matter. "Daniel, I'm going to be direct with you," Denise said, folding her hands on the desk the way she'd practiced in the mirror the night before. "Your attendance this quarter doesn't meet the standard we need. I've reviewed it with HR, and effective today, your position is being eliminated." He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that carries an entire conversation nobody says out loud, and asked one question. "Did you look at why?" "I looked at the numbers," Denise said. "That's my job." He nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he's already spent his energy fighting bigger battles than this one. And he stood up, and he walked out of that glass office without another word. 2 security guards, more out of company policy than necessity, walked him to his locker, and then to the parking lot, past the crew he'd worked beside for 6 years, none of whom fully understood what was happening until it already had. Denise watched from the window. And here is the part she would later wish she could take back, the part that would follow her long after that morning ended. She smiled. She actually smiled, and turned to her assistant manager, a nervous young man named Corey, who had said nothing the entire meeting, and said, "That's how you clean house." Corey didn't smile back. He just glanced out the window at Daniel's truck pulling out of the lot, and said quietly, "You sure about that one, Denise?" "I've never been more sure of anything," she said. She wasn't wrong that she needed a win. What she didn't know was that the win she'd just handed herself was about to blow up in a way she couldn't have imagined, because 40 minutes later, a black SUV pulled into the executive parking spot at the front of the building, a spot that had sat empty for over a year. Meridian Logistics had been quietly bought out 3 months earlier by a holding company nobody in the warehouse had bothered to research. The rumor mill said it was some tech investor, someone rarely seen, someone who communicated through memos and never showed his face. Denise had heard his name exactly once, in a company-wide email. Marcus Cole. She'd pictured someone in his 60s, gray-haired, distant, the kind of owner who cared about spreadsheets and nothing else. What walked through the front doors that morning was a man in his late 30s, in a plain gray jacket. No entourage, no assistant trailing behind him with a clipboard. He walked like someone who already knew the building better than the people who worked there. He nodded at the front desk receptionist, who nearly dropped her coffee, recognizing him from a single photo she'd seen in a press release, and he asked her one thing before he'd even taken off his jacket. "Is Daniel Reyes on shift this morning?" The receptionist blinked. I think so? Let me check." Word moves fast in a warehouse. By the time Marcus Cole made it to the floor manager's office, 3 different people had already whispered to each other that the owner was here, and he was asking for Daniel by name. Denise heard it secondhand from Corey, who came into her office pale-faced and out of breath. "Denise, the owner's here. He's asking where Daniel is." For a second, she genuinely thought it was a coincidence. Owners visited warehouses sometimes. Maybe he wanted a tour. Maybe he wanted to shake hands with a few employees for a photo op. She smoothed down her blazer, checked her reflection in the dark computer screen, and walked out to greet him with the practiced confidence of someone who believed she was about to be congratulated. "Mr. Cole," she said, extending her hand. "It's an honor. I'm Denise Whitfield, regional supervisor here. Welcome to the Columbus facility." Marcus Cole shook her hand, but his eyes were already scanning the floor behind her, searching the aisles, the loading dock, the break room. "Thank you," he said. "I'm looking for one of your employees, Daniel Reyes. Overnight inventory lead. Is he in today?" And this is the moment Denise would replay for months afterward, turning it over and over, trying to find a version where she'd answered differently. "Actually," she said, still smiling, still certain she was about to be praised for her decisiveness, "I let him go this morning. Attendance issues. I can pull the file if you'd like to see the numbers." Marcus Cole went very still. "You fired him," he said. "It wasn't a question. I did. I know it might seem harsh, but the numbers didn't support." "Get him back here," Marcus said. "Now." The shift in his voice was immediate, and it silenced everyone within earshot. Corey, standing a few feet away, pretending to check inventory tablets, froze completely. Denise felt something cold drop through her chest, the first real crack in the confidence she'd been standing on all morning. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't understand." "You will," Marcus said. "Call him. Tell him I need to see him. Tell him it's important. And tell him I'm sorry it took me this long to get here." Denise's hands were shaking as she dialed the number pulled from Daniel's file, the same file she'd used to end his employment 2 hours earlier. It rang 4 times before he picked up. His voice flat, guarded, the voice of a man expecting more bad news. "Daniel, this is Denise. I need you to come back to the warehouse. Mr. Cole is here and he's asking for you." There was a long pause on the other end. "Why would the owner be asking for me?" "I don't know," she admitted, and for the first time that day, it was the truth. While they waited, Marcus Cole asked to see the office where the meeting had taken place. He asked Denise to walk him through exactly what she'd told Daniel, word for word, if she could remember it. She stumbled through the conversation, feeling smaller with every sentence, watching his expression shift from controlled patience to something harder to read, something that looked almost like grief. "Do you know why he was late those 4 days?" Marcus asked. "I know there were personal circumstances," Denise said carefully, but the policy doesn't have an exception for... His daughter has a congenital heart defect, Marcus said. She's 7 years old. She's had 2 surgeries already, and she has cardiology appointments that get moved around depending on what the monitors show. Daniel has been making up every single hour he's missed on his own time, without being asked, for over a year. Did anyone tell you that? Denise's mouth went dry. It wasn't in the file I was given. Then maybe the file was the problem, Marcus said quietly. Not him. 20 minutes later, Daniel walked back through the same doors he'd been escorted out of that morning, still in the same shirt, his expression wary, like a man bracing for one more disappointment before the day was over. When he saw Marcus Cole standing in the middle of the warehouse floor, he stopped walking entirely. "Marcus?" he said, and something in the way he said the name made Denise's stomach drop even further, because it wasn't the way an employee says a stranger's name. It was the way you say the name of someone you've known a long time. "It's been a while," Marcus said, and for the first time all day, his voice softened. He crossed the floor and pulled Daniel into a handshake that turned into something closer to an embrace, the kind 2 men share, when there's history between them that a warehouse full of strangers wouldn't understand. Denise stood frozen, watching, piecing together a story she was only now beginning to realize she'd walked straight into the middle of. Marcus turned to the small crowd that had gathered, employees drawn out of the aisles by the sight of the owner hugging a man who'd been fired that same morning, and he didn't lower his voice at all. 15 years ago, Marcus said, I was 19 years old, sleeping in my car outside a warehouse, very similar to this one, because my father had walked out and my mother couldn't cover rent on her own. Daniel's father ran the night shift crew at that warehouse. He didn't have to notice me. Nobody else did. But he did. He got me a job stacking boxes. He covered for me more times than I can count when I showed up exhausted or late because I'd been sleeping somewhere I shouldn't have been, and when his own son, Daniel here, needed help years later. I made sure I never forgot what that family did for me when I had nothing. He paused, letting that settle over the room. When I bought this company, I didn't do it for the warehouses or the shipping contracts. I bought it because Daniel worked here, and because I promised his father, before he passed, that I would look out for his son the way he looked out for me. I've been building a leadership program for the last 2 years to bring good people like Daniel into management. People who understand what it actually costs an employee to show up every single day. Daniel was going to be offered the Regional Operations Director position this afternoon. That decision was already made. I flew in specifically to tell him myself. The silence in that warehouse was the loudest thing Denise had ever heard. So, when I walked in today, Marcus continued, turning to face her directly now, and asked where he was, and found out he'd been fired that same morning over an attendance policy that didn't account for a sick child by the very person I was about to hand a promotion to review, I think you can understand why I'm not in a celebratory mood. Denise opened her mouth, but no words came. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't make it worse. I built this company on the idea that the people who show up for their families are the same people who'll show up for you when it matters, Marcus said. You didn't just fire an employee this morning, Denise. You fired the man I trusted to help me fix everything wrong with places like this. And you did it smiling. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. 2 hours later, Denise cleaned out her own desk, the same glass office where she'd delivered the news that morning, and walked out through the same doors, past the same co-workers, none of whom looked away this time. Daniel Reyes took the director position 3 weeks later, once Lily's next round of appointments had cleared, and he'd had time to sit with his daughter and explain. In the gentle way parents find the words for things too big for a 7-year-old to fully understand, that her dad had a new job now, one where nobody would ever again ask him to choose between his paycheck and her heartbeat. The first policy he implemented was simple. Any employee with a documented medical circumstance for themselves or an immediate family member, would have flexible scheduling built into their contract. No exceptions. No case-by-case gambling on whether a manager felt generous that week. He named it, at Marcus's suggestion, the Reyes policy, though Daniel always insisted it should have carried his father's name instead of his own. Denise never worked in logistics again. She took a job eventually, somewhere far smaller, somewhere quieter. And people who knew her before said she was different now, slower to judge, quicker to ask questions before she made decisions that could end someone's week, or their year, or the only thing keeping a roof over a little girl's head. Because, in the end, that's the lesson nobody in that break room understood, while the champagne was still cold. You never really know who's standing in front of you, what they're carrying home with them every night, or how much of themselves they've already given just to make it through the day. Denise thought she was proving her strength when she walked Daniel out that door. What she actually proved was how easily power turns cruel when it forgets to ask why. And somewhere in Columbus, Ohio, a little girl named Lily still keeps a photo taped to her hospital binder. One her father snapped on his first day as director, standing in front of a warehouse that finally, after everything, saw him for who he really was.